Electrician called me on a Thursday afternoon in late October, and I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. I was sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store in Tucson, engine running, trying to decide if I had the energy to go inside. My mother had been gone for 11 weeks. I was still in that period where the ordinary things, grocery stores, gas stations, the particular way afternoon light comes through a car windshield, felt slightly wrong, like they belonged to a version of my life that no longer applied. "Mr. Deere, Whitfield," the man said. His name was Pete. He was the electrician my cousin had recommended to rewire the kitchen in my mother's house before I put it on the market. "I need you to come by the shop. I found something in the wall behind the breaker panel." He paused. "I think you should see it yourself, and maybe come without your wife if that's okay, just to start." I asked him what he meant. "I don't want to say more than that over the phone," he said. "I just think it should be you first." My mother had lived in that house for 31 years. It was a single-story adobe on the east side of Tucson, in a neighborhood that had been working class when she bought it and had slowly become something harder to name. She had raised me and my sister there after my father left when I was 9. She had run a small alterations and tailoring shop out of the converted garage for most of those years, the kind of business where her regulars knew to call her cell phone directly, and she knew their sizes by memory. She was 64 when she died. Her doctor said it was a pulmonary embolism, fast, he said, which I think he meant as a comfort. I'm still not sure it was. I drove the 20 minutes to the house without stopping at the grocery store. Pete was waiting out front. He was a compact, weathered man in his 50s, and he had the look of someone who had been standing there long enough that he'd started to feel the weight of what he was waiting to say. He shook my hand with both of his, which was not how we had greeted each other at the job site 2 days earlier. "I want to be straight with you," he said as we walked inside. "I've done electrical work in maybe 300 houses in this city. I find things, old knob and tube, nobody patched right, junction boxes somebody drywalled over, that kind of thing. People hide things in walls because they ran out of ideas or because they were afraid." He stopped at the entrance to the kitchen. "I don't open things that aren't mine to open. I want you to know that." The wall behind the breaker panel had been opened. Pete had pulled back the drywall to access the wiring, which was the job I'd hired him for. The panel itself was original to the house, a setup that hadn't been touched in probably 20 years. But behind the panel, in the gap between the wall studs, there was a metal fireproof box, the kind sold at hardware stores for documents and small valuables, roughly the size of a hardback book, gunmetal gray. A 3-digit combination lock on the front. "It was wedged in tight," Pete said, "but whoever put it there wanted it findable. The panel cover was just friction fit, no screws. Someone could pull it off by hand." He set the box on the kitchen counter and stepped back, the way Marcus had stepped back in the other story I'd heard, the way people who understand privacy create space for it. "I'll get some fresh air," he said, and went out through the back door. I stood alone in my mother's kitchen. The countertops were the same pale yellow laminate she'd had since before I was born. The curtains over the sink were the ones she'd sewn herself from fabric she bought at a remnant sale. A pattern of small blue cornflowers that I had looked at every morning of my childhood without ever really seeing. The coffee maker was still on the counter. I had unplugged it the day after she died and hadn't moved it. I looked at the box for a long time before I touched it. My mother was not a woman who talked about money. I don't mean she was secretive exactly. I mean she came from a family that had grown up treating finances as a private matter, something you handled quietly and didn't discuss at the dinner table. She had run her shop for nearly 3 decades and kept her books in a ledger she bought every January at the office supply store on Speedway. When I was a teenager, I used to see her at the kitchen table on Sunday evenings, going through receipts with a pencil and a calculator, and I knew not to interrupt that. The combination. I tried her birthday first. Nothing. I tried her birthday first. Nothing. I tried mine. Nothing. I tried the year she had bought the house, 1993. The lock opened. Inside the box there were three things. A small spiral notebook, the kind with a cardboard cover, filled with my mother's handwriting. A white envelope, sealed with my name on the front in the careful cursive she had learned in school and kept her whole life. And a savings account passbook from a credit union I didn't recognize, Southwest Community Federal, a small institution I'd never heard her mention, with a balance listed at the last entry of $47,212. I picked up the envelope with my name on it first. My mother had been in a business partnership of a kind for the last 9 years of her life. I did not know this. She had never used the word partnership with me. What I knew was that approximately 9 years ago, a man named Wayne Colbert had begun referring customers to her shop. He ran a dry cleaning operation with 2 locations on the north side of the city, and he would send clients to her when they needed alterations beyond what his staff could handle, hemming, taking in, structural repairs to garments his machines couldn't touch. She mentioned him occasionally. She said he was a good businessman and sent her quality referrals. What the letter told me was more complicated than that. About 8 years ago, according to my mother's account, Wayne Colbert had approached her with a proposal. He wanted to expand into a 3rd location, and he needed a partner to share the lease and the operating costs for the first 2 years. In exchange, she would receive a percentage of the revenue from the alterations work he routed through her shop and, eventually, a small equity stake in the new location. She had agreed. They had drawn up an informal agreement, not a formal partnership filing, nothing registered with the county or the state, just a written document that my mother kept in her files and that Wayne Colbert had signed. She wrote that she had trusted him because the referrals had been real and because she was, by that point in her life, tired of doing everything alone. The 3rd location opened. It did well. For the first 2 years, she received the revenue share they had agreed on, deposited in checks made out to cash because Wayne had said, and she had accepted, that keeping the arrangement informal was simpler for his accounting. Then the checks became irregular. Then they stopped. When she asked, he told her that the 3rd location had underperformed and that the equity stake had been structured, he now clarified, as contingent on profitability targets she hadn't been told about. He showed her a document. It was not the document she had signed. The one he showed her had different terms, printed on paper that looked like the original but wasn't. My mother had kept the original. She wrote that she had taken both documents to an attorney. The attorney had told her she had a case, but that pursuing it would cost money she didn't have in liquid form and time she wasn't sure she had. She was 61 by then. She wrote that she had made the decision not to fight it in court, not because she believed Wayne Colbert was right, but because she didn't want to spend the last years of her working life in a legal proceeding that might outlast her shop. She wrote that she understood this might seem like giving up. She wrote that it wasn't. She wrote, "There is more than one way to make something right, and I believe in taking the one that doesn't cost you more than the fight is worth." But I did not let it go entirely. I want you to understand that. The notebook was the record. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't remember deciding to sit. I just remember being on the floor, and I went through it. She had spent the last 6 years of her life tracking Wayne Colbert's business the way a person tracks something they intend to understand completely. She had copies of his business filings with the Arizona Corporation Commission, which are public records. She had records of the 3rd location's revenue, pieced together from public tax filings and from conversations she had logged, with dates and quotes, with people in the alterations community who had done contract work for him. She had a timeline of deposits into her shop account that showed the exact month the revenue share had stopped. She had a copy of the original agreement they had signed and a side-by-side comparison she had typed up herself, showing the specific language that differed in the document he had produced. She had also, in the last 2 pages of the notebook, documented something I was not prepared for. Wayne Colbert had applied for and received a small business grant through a county economic development program, a program specifically designated for minority-owned businesses. The documentation he submitted listed his business as 51% owned by a silent partner, a woman whose name I didn't recognize. My mother had researched the name. The woman existed. She was real, but she had no operational role, no investment, and no knowledge, according to what my mother had been able to piece together of her name being used in the filing. The grant was for $38,000. My mother had written at the bottom of that page, "I reported this anonymously to the county office 18 months ago. I don't know what happened with it. I don't know if they looked into it or not. I want you to have this in case you decide there is something worth doing with it." I stayed on that kitchen floor for a long time. Pete knocked on the back door eventually, and I told him to come in. He looked at me and didn't ask any questions, which was the right thing to do. I asked him if he wanted coffee and then remembered the machine was unplugged, and we both just stood there for a moment in a way that felt, somehow, appropriate. I called my sister that evening. Her name is Margot, and she lives in Albuquerque, and she had been closer to our mother than I was in those last few years, in the way that geographic closeness and a shared phone call routine creates a kind of intimacy that doesn't always translate across distance. I had visited when I could. I had told myself that was enough. Margot did not know about any of it. She was quiet on the phone for so long that I asked if she was still there. She said she was. She said she was. She said she was thinking. Then she said something that I've turned over in my mind many times since. She said she didn't tell us because she didn't want us to be worried about her while she was handling it. She always thought our worry was a burden to her, not a help. I think Margot was right. My mother was the kind of woman who solved problems before she told you about them, not because she was secretive, but because she had spent 30 years making sure the people she loved didn't have to carry things she could carry herself. It was a kind of love that looked from the outside like self-sufficiency. It was both. The passbook was the thing I kept coming back to. $47,000. She had opened the account 4 years before she died. The credit union was small, the kind of institution that still mailed paper statements, and the deposits were irregular. Sometimes $200, sometimes $800, never a round number, which told me she had been putting in what she could when she could without a fixed plan. The last deposit was 3 months before she died. She had never mentioned it. She had never spent it. I called the credit union the following Monday and spoke to a branch manager who confirmed the account and confirmed that I was listed as the sole beneficiary. She explained the process for claiming the funds. She was professional and kind, and I managed to hold it together through the call, which I considered, at the time, a minor victory. I sat with the notebook and the original agreement and the documentation of the grant filing for 2 weeks before I did anything. Margot flew in and we sat at that same kitchen table, the pale yellow laminate, the cornflower curtains, and went through everything together. She had printed out some additional information about the county grant program and found that the Economic Development Office had, in fact, conducted a review of several applications from that period. There was a brief public record of an inquiry. Whether it had been triggered by my mother's anonymous report, we had no way of knowing. I hired an attorney. I want to be honest that it was not a straightforward decision. The original agreement my mother had kept was real, and it was detailed, and the comparison she had typed up between the two documents was the work of someone who had been meticulous in a way I had not fully understood about her until that moment. But 9 years is a long time, and informal agreements are difficult to litigate, and I was not interested in a fight I couldn't see clearly. I told the attorney that. She said something I wrote down afterward. Your mother's documentation doesn't ask you to fight everything. It asks you to decide what you can prove. We focused on what we could prove. The original agreement established a clear verbal and written commitment to revenue sharing. The paper trail my mother had maintained showed the exact cessation of payment. The comparison of the two documents was, in the attorney's words, very difficult to explain away. We sent a formal demand letter. Wayne Colbert did not respond for 3 weeks. Then his attorney responded. Then there were several months of what my attorney called the usual process, which involved a lot of waiting and a few meetings and a considerable amount of paper. I will not pretend it was satisfying in any dramatic sense. It wasn't a courtroom. There was no moment of public confrontation. It was a civil proceeding, and it moved at the pace of civil proceedings. He settled. The amount is not something I can disclose in full. What I can say is that the number reflected what my mother's original agreement had entitled her to, with interest calculated over the years it had gone unpaid. It was not a windfall. It was what she was owed. The grand matter was referred separately. My attorney sent the documentation to the County Economic Development Office as a formal submission rather than an anonymous tip. As of the last update I received, the matter was under review. I do not know what will come of it. I have made my peace with not knowing. The house sold in February. We kept the closing date quiet because Margot and I both needed it to be a private thing. The night before we signed the paperwork, I went back alone. The kitchen still smelled like her, a combination of fabric sizing and the particular dish soap she had used my whole life, lemon yellow, in a bottle by the sink. The garage shop was empty. The curtains were still on the window because the buyer had asked if they could stay, and I had said yes without thinking about it, and then been grateful I had. I stood in the kitchen for a while without doing much of anything. I thought about all the Sunday evenings I had sat at that table doing homework while she went through her receipts. The pencil, the calculator, the particular focused quiet of a woman who understood that keeping careful records was not just a business habit, but a form of dignity. A way of saying, I see what is happening here, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, and I am going to write it down. She had done that for 47 years. She had done it with her shop ledger and with her Sunday evenings and with a spiral notebook wedged behind a breaker panel in a wall she had painted herself in 1993 and had never gotten around to repainting. The passbook money is in an account Margot and I opened jointly. We haven't touched it. We've talked about it the way you talk about something that isn't ready to be a decision yet. Margot thinks we should use it for something she would have liked. I think she's right, but I can't say yet what that is. We're both still in the part of grief where the choices feel large. I drove to the cemetery on a Saturday morning in March, a few weeks after the closing. It had rained the night before, and the ground was soft, and the mountains to the east were clear against the sky. The way they only are after rain, sharp-edged and close-looking. I stood at her grave and I thought about what I wanted to say, and nothing came out the way I planned. What I said, finally, out loud, was, "We found it, Mom. We took care of it." It felt true. I don't know if I handled everything the way she would have. She was better at this than I am. More patient, more precise, more willing to do the quiet work over the long years without needing it to resolve into something clean. I tried to bring the same care to it that she had. I tried to let the record speak, the way she had taught me to, without quite ever meaning to teach me anything. She built that record over 6 years, in the margins of a business that was also a life, while she was hemming trousers and taking in waistbands and resewing the lining of a coat for a woman whose name she knew and whose grandmother had brought the coat over from somewhere she no longer remembered. She built it without telling me, without telling Margot, without ever once suggesting that she was carrying something that had not been settled. She was not a woman who complained. She was a woman who documented. And in the end, she trusted that one of us would find it and would know what to do and would carry it across the finish line she had done most of the work to reach. I only wish she could have seen it. I keep thinking about those Sunday evenings, my mother at the kitchen table with her pencil and her calculator, going through receipts while I did homework across from her, and neither of us speaking because there was nothing that needed to be said. I thought I understood what she was doing. I thought it was just bookkeeping. It wasn't just bookkeeping. What I understand now, in a way I couldn't have understood before I found that notebook, is that she was practicing something, Not a ritual, not a habit, a discipline. The discipline of seeing things clearly and writing them down without letting anger make the record messy. Wayne Colbert had taken something from her. He had done it deliberately, with a forged document and a handshake she had trusted, and she had known it from the moment it happened. What she chose to do with that knowledge was not what most people would have chosen. She didn't rage. She didn't confront him in a way that would have cost her more than she could afford to lose. She sat down and she started writing. That takes a particular kind of integrity. Not the showy kind that announces itself, the quiet kind, the kind that keeps doing the right thing even when no one is watching and no one will ever know unless they find a fireproof box behind a breaker panel 11 weeks after you're gone. She could have falsified her own records to strengthen her case. She didn't. She documented only what she could verify. She noted in her own handwriting the things she wasn't certain about. That precision was moral. It was a form of honesty that most people abandon the moment the stakes get personal. And then there was the intelligence of it. Not cleverness, something steadier than that. She had figured out how to build a case without a law degree and without anyone helping her, using public records and dated receipts and her own memory of conversations she had written down the same day they happened. She had understood years before I did that the grant documentation was the thread most likely to matter to someone outside the two of them. She had sent the anonymous report. She had waited. She had kept building anyway, because she understood that preparation and outcome are not the same thing, and that you do the work whether or not you get to see what it produces. What she left me wasn't just documentation. It was a model, a way of moving through a situation that had tried to defeat her without letting it make her into something smaller. She absorbed the loss. She kept her shop running. She raised her records the way a contractor raises a wall, one careful course at a time, level and plumb, built to hold weight. I have thought about what I owe her for that. Not the settlement. The settlement was just arithmetic. What was taken returned with interest. What I owe her is harder to name. I think it is this, to carry myself through the difficult things with the same steadiness she did. To write things down. To be precise, to hold on long enough to let the record speak. She was not a woman who needed to be remembered as extraordinary. She would have been quietly embarrassed by that framing. She was a woman who did her work, kept her word, and made sure the people she loved had what they needed to go forward. I'm still learning how to be that.